Hey friends, welcome to a special bonus episode of Intentional Living and Leadership with me, Cal Walters, here in my guest bedroom. If this is your first time tuning into this podcast, I want to welcome you and thank you for being here. This is a podcast focused on self-leadership, personal growth, and organizational leadership, and we typically release an episode every other Tuesday, but today we're releasing a special episode specifically for healthcare leaders during this time of crisis as we battle the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, I'm excited to bring you an interview I did with Dr. Kevin Kniery, Dr. Tom Hustead, and Dr. Scott Steele. Let me introduce them real quick. Dr. Kniery is a vascular surgery fellow in New York City, and he's the co-host of two podcasts, Behind the Knife and Audible Bleeding. Dr. Kniery is one of my best friends. He's my West Point classmate, and Dr. Kniery got his MD and MPH from Tulane University. Dr. Tom Hustead is a graduate of West Point. He graduated in the top 3% of his class, and he received his medical degree from Case Western University School of Medicine. As a retired Army colonel, highlights from his distinguished career include deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, being awarded Flight Surgeon of the Year for his service in combat, Outstanding Faculty of the Year for his medical training, and board selection as department chair for a family medicine residency department. As a result of his appointment by the Army Surgeon General to be the face of military medicine to recruit and share the Army medicine story, Dr. Hustead recognized a need and developed a passion for teaching physicians across the country to be effectively engaged leaders. In his final appointment in the military, Dr. Hustead was the commander and CEO of a NATO military medical facility at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe in Belgium. Dr. Hustead currently practices as a family physician at Hardin Memorial Health and serves as medical director for their employed medical group. Dr. Hustead also co-founded the Referent Group, which provides training, coaching, and resources for healthcare leaders. With an emphasis on servant leadership, Dr. Hustead's core conviction is that effective leadership is never about the leader, but should be focused on creating a culture where those being led can flourish. Dr. Scott Steele is chair of colorectal surgery at Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. As a graduate of West Point, he was an active duty Army officer serving as chief of colorectal surgery at Madigan Army Medical Center in Fort Lewis, Washington. He served 4 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, being awarded the Combat Medical Badge, among others. His contributions to the medical literature include over 140 peer-reviewed articles, 60 invited reviews and book chapters, 12 national practice parameters, guest editor for 5 volumes dedicated to colorectal disease, and currently is an editor of 4 textbooks in colorectal surgery. We recorded this interview on March 28, 2020, a time when our nation's entire medical ecosystem is mobilizing for war against COVID-19. While many Americans are working from home to blunt the spread of this virus, healthcare clinicians and administrators are working around the clock to prepare for the coming tsunami of patients. The scope and the scale of the coming fight is truly unprecedented in the healthcare community. Whether the U.S. can successfully flatten the curve or not, this pandemic will stretch the U.S. healthcare capabilities and its workers to the limit. And strong leadership will be needed at every level to address the physical and psychological stresses our healthcare professionals will experience in the coming weeks. I hope that the insights and the proven leadership principles offered by Dr. Hustead and Dr. Steele can provide healthcare leaders clarity in this prolonged and all-consuming fight to beat COVID-19. We will beat this. You can find show notes and contact information for Dr. Kniery, Dr. Hustead, and Dr. Steele, and information on the Referent Group, which is a leadership consulting group at calwalters.me, just my name, .me. Without any further ado, please enjoy this interview with Dr. Kniery, Dr. Hustead, and Dr. Steele. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. We've come together at truly an unprecedented time in at least our lifetimes. Our nation's entire medical ecosystem is mobilizing for war against COVID-19. Right now, the scope and the scale of the coming fight is something that we have not seen in the healthcare industry. With Dr. Hustead and Dr. Steele, both with experience in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm excited for you all to be able to share some of the leadership principles, the proven leadership principles that you've learned through that experience. I'd love to start with Dr. Kniery. You are in New York City, the epicenter of this crisis. Can you kind of take us to what you're seeing at your hospital in New York City to kind of set the stage?
Yeah, for the listeners out there, I'm a vascular surgery fellow, and this is really a crisis in the critical care and kind of medicine non-surgical issues. So I've really been a bystander and have gotten to have an interesting perspective on this. I'm really not in the middle of the fight as of yet, but I've been able to kind of visualize what the hospital and the leadership is doing. So currently, as of 28 March, New York City is the epicenter of coronavirus in the US. There are 30,000 infected, accounting for 1/3 of all coronavirus cases in the US. And 3 to 4% of these patients are ending up in the ICU on ventilators. And once they're in the ICU on a ventilator, the mortality rate is close to 50% based on studies out of China and Italy. We haven't
Wow.
had enough time to really see that here yet because they've just been put on ventilators in the past week. And many times these patients are on ventilators for a week to a month. And so we haven't really seen what the mortality rate is going to be here. But currently in New York City, there's a death from coronavirus every 10 minutes. We're 10 days into a citywide lockdown, and the peak of the virus isn't expected to hit till about 2 weeks from now. And part of the reason for this is many of these patients are asymptomatic for 4 to 7 days before they even show any symptoms. And then the average length of infection before needing a ventilator is 10 to 14 days. But once they do become sick, they decompensate very rapidly, which means they go from being fine to needing breathing assistance within hours. So all hospitals by by Governor Cuomo were ordered to increase their capacity of ICU beds and ventilators by 100%. The convention center is actively being turned into a 1,000-bed ICU with the help of the U.S. Army field hospitals. And the Mercy ship is arriving in New York City this Monday to help with non-COVID patients. So that's sort of what we're seeing, just the kind of basic facts here in New York City. It's definitely a scary time.
Wow. Dr. Steele, what are you seeing in Cleveland?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of the things that Kevin said. Obviously, the differences between the pulmonary or the critical care medicine and surgery at these stages are a little bit different. We have not seen yet the upswing here in Cleveland as we record this. And, I think we're actually somewhat blessed here in Cleveland for the size of the city and the surrounding region. We have three major medical systems here that are all working together in unison to establish best practices and share ideas and strategies for then how to scale this as we've needed. That not only considers the current conditions, but expectations, as Kevin talked a little bit about modeling. I would say our leadership at the Cleveland Clinic, where I am currently the chairman of colorectal surgery, has done an outstanding job with communication, transparency. These are, I know, some of the concepts that we're going to talk a little bit about today, but also that operational aspect to prepare people. We talk about redeployment and other things about how we get people and they're out of their comfort zone, but also trained up appropriately. That's a lot of the things that we've done in the military in the past in terms of cross training. And, to prepare for what many people in the world have already been experiencing, as Kevin said. As many people have discussed that are far more knowledgeable on this topic than I am, this pandemic has really no particular ties to an aspect of society. And it not only touches kind of health, but it also touches economically and social norms and lifestyle choices, and really mandates what we look at from all aspects to not only choose how we're going to respond individually, but also on a collective level. And then that's nothing to say also, what is the way forward? And what's very interesting about pandemics oftentimes is what comes out of this, both in a negative light, but as well as in a positive way. And some of the ways, you could take a simple Google and see what has come out of different pandemics of the past. And maybe it's the online virtual visit platform or something like that. So trying times, something that, we haven't experienced, but it's an interesting topic and I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, to Dr. Steele's point, I think there's just so much uncertainty. And I think you both mentioned that you're kind of building to something that maybe has not yet fully arrived. And I think there's this sense of preparation. Dr. Hustead, you are a medical director. You also are the founder and you run a leadership consulting company, the Referent Group. What are you seeing at your location? And what type of leadership advice might you give to those healthcare providers that are on the front lines or running a hospital during these difficult times?
Yeah, I mean, as far as what we're seeing, it'd be similar to what our colleagues have just talked about. We're dealing with issues that you hear about on the news all the time: the ability to test, the PPE, the protective equipment, not having exactly what you want and the ideal, and running short. How do you use it in a better way? all the mitigation strategies, canceling routine stuff and surgeries and figuring all that out. And from a leadership perspective, these are some significant issues that we have never dealt with before. So it's a problem that there is no playbook yet. We're just trying to figure this out. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's some things that more than ever, we need good leadership in these times. And as they've stated, I think it's a great platform for us to be able to share, hey, the military has some really neat ways of addressing leadership in crisis. And, before we get into some of the details, I would say some of the things that, as I've matured as a leader and made a lot of mistakes along the way, one thing I am learning is leadership is never about me. So it's always about the people that you're leading. And I think if we can start with some big, type of leadership thoughts like that it's how do we set the people that we're leading, that surgeon, that internal medicine doc, that nurse, whoever it is, the dining facility workers, all those, how do we set them up for success? So how do we give them the things that they need to be successful? If we can start with that thought, that it's not about me trying to be successful or me trying to separate myself or whatever it is, it's about them. That's a good start. And then quite honestly, Cal, in this situation from a big level perspective, you posted something, I read sometime in the past week about some of your thoughts on the COVID-19 and what it's causing. And one of them that stuck with me was fear is contagious, but so too is courage. And that thought right now is a great thought. There is a lot of unrest. There's a lot of fear and concerns among the medical community at every level, quite honestly. And when I say courage, and you kind of spelled it out too, it's not reckless courage. It's not, I'm going to go in and take care of a COVID patient, but I'm not going to wear my PPE. That's silly, right? That's reckless. It's courage. And, maybe it's the courage to just attack the situation, think critically, solve problems, and hopefully inspire the people that you are working for to lead, to join you on that team and go forward. So those are kind of some overarching thoughts that I had as we were considering this. And then I know we'll get into maybe some of the little more detailed things as we continue on. But thank you for having me. I look forward to this discussion.
Dr. Hustead, just to kind of follow up from that, you mentioned kind of having to get into these new rhythms for a lot of people. This is a new pace of operation, I imagine, for a lot of hospitals, for a lot of physicians, nurses. What specifically should leaders be thinking about as they transition to maybe a new pace that in a lot of ways probably mirrors combat? Not to mention the fact that there are probably a lot of these same emotions that people feel in a combat type situation: fear of people dying, fear of failure, not maybe knowing how to deal with some emotions that you're feeling potentially for the first time. How do you take care of your people? And then, of course, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah, that these are principles that seem so basic, but we often, especially doctors, we fail at because it's almost a badge of courage to stay up all night. To take call every second or third night. We've been there, we've done that, and so to sleep or maybe even to eat may be a sign of weakness. Because I don't have time for that. I got to move, and if we don't take care of ourselves, and again, these are simple principles, but if the leader doesn't take care of themselves, whether that's sleeping, nutrition, exercise, emotionally, spiritually, then how do you take care of your people? And understanding that they have the needs of the same thing: the sleeping, the eating appropriately, taking the breaks they need, exercise, but also they have a significant emotional component that you want to meet that need, and don't dispel it. Talk about it, ask how they're doing, try to give some breaks from the chaos where you can do those kind of things, and realize that it's not just what they're doing in the hospital, it's their family. And I'm seeing it, a lot of people are scared to bring it back to their families. How's it affecting their families? So not missing those opportunities to talk through those issues with those that you're leading is important.
Dr. Steele, pulling from some of your combat experience and leadership elsewhere, what have you found is important to sustain yourself during difficult times?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here, and Tom's words are critical and very important. That some of the most basic things sometimes get overlooked. I think you have to view both from a collective as well as an individual. So individually, you have to know yourself. And it's really, as he said, it's a time to check in, not just with yourself, but with everybody physically, mentally, spiritually, just as he kind of outlined there. But the reality is as you're leading, you have to make sure that your team understands, number one, that they were trained appropriately for a situation, that they have a mission, and whether that mission is providing world-class care of these patients who come in, and it might be a novel disease that comes in. You're still a respiratory tech, or you're still a surgeon, or you're still somebody, and you have a mission to be able to do, and you have been trained and experienced in that, and to allow them to make sure that they know that that they're there to do their job, and that they're adequately trained to do their job. I think with some of the things that I was talking about before, very briefly, in terms of, taking on and cross-training and stuff, that provides a little bit of some uncertainty. Whereas, we're used to operating, and this is not, as Kevin said, an operative disease. And so, but we've gone back to residency, we've had some surgical critical care experience in managing vents and stuff. So how do we as leaders then go in and make sure that we get the proper refresher courses, but we also have the backup and that person there side by side who is along you with the way, so that you don't seem like you're out on an island, but also that you're doing the right thing first and foremost for your patients. And so having those things in place and taking that time right now as an organization to get your people adequately cross-trained, to get them matched up appropriately, to plan for the scale of events if they do meet some of these modeling criteria, that's critical. I think that, this whole concept of fear and how do you deal with fear, I think that crosses all boundaries. When we were in combat, I would tell you, just as one example, one of my deployments in 2008, we had a specialist, a medic that was a good medic, but where we had gone in near the Iranian border, there wasn't a whole lot to do right away at the beginning. They'd kind of gone out, and until one of the very mornings when we got hit with 15, 18 rockets in a row, and she went out into that and dragged people in, whereas other people, maybe even some of the people who felt they were, the most hoo-ah, if you will, really had a different response to that one. And if truth be told, I wouldn't have thought she was the one that would have gone out and dragged people in, and she was. And so that concept of how you deal with fear, but to make sure you never really know, nobody really knows. And, this is not unlike a lot of the situation, as you said, Carl, dealing with a combat situation where there's not only the fear of what's going to happen to you, but the person that you're taking care of and the people around you. And so you really do have to go back to the basics. I heard two interesting quotes this week. One of them was by Mark Cuban, actually on sports. I love sports. And he was on the Colin Cowherd show. And I don't know if this is his quote or not, but he said, remember that being a leader does not mean that you have to be the leader. And that kind of struck with me and said, that's so true, because we need to be able to take a look around and listen to the people that are around us and take ideas, no matter who they're from. Tom said it really well. The person who, takes out the garbage versus the person who's the HVAC guy versus the tech or the circulating nurse or, the respiratory tech. All these different people can evaluate the situation, bring their experience and expertise into it. The other thing is that I got my MBA at Case Western, and one of my the assistant deans there, he had an interesting concept of what he said about leaders. He said that you need to balance a little bit of concern with tone. You need to let the people know that you're human. But he always used to say a word. He'd say, think about Mickey Mouse. And as leaders, you need to outperform Mickey. And I didn't quite understand what he meant. But he said, think about the guy it's 100 degrees inside that Mickey Mouse suit. But what do the kids see that go to Disney World? They see the smiling Mickey. And somebody's in there, even if they're having a bad day or they're upset or something. And part of the leader's job is to instill confidence, and they take that tone from you as a leader. And so, you don't have to be fake and anything like that. And it's okay to show that you have emotion, but you do need to balance that, understanding that during times of crisis, people will look towards their leaders. They will look towards you, and you're setting the tone for that organization. And if you give off a tone that, that we don't know what we're doing, or we are underprepared or scared, that, as Tom said, fear is contagious. As you said, fear is contagious, but so is courage. And so it is that balance between the two. And that's something that I think that we need to acknowledge, that balance, and then kind of incorporate it into the day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think those are all incredible points. And I think, I go back to my time in Ranger School, for example, when I got lost and I lost my composure, and everyone in my platoon also lost their composure and simultaneously their confidence in me. And I think as the leader, there's this element we may feel fear, but we have to remain calm and remain composed, because that has an effect on our organization. Dr. Kniery, I wanted to ask you about something that you've mentioned to me before, and it's about communication in times of crisis. I think sometimes, I think it was Stan McChrystal was talking about how sometimes during times of crisis or during combat, our internal rhythms and our communication has to mirror the pace of our external circumstances. So right now, things are moving very quickly. What are you seeing at your hospital in terms of communication?
Yeah, I think they've done a fantastic job on every level of communicating to us. So every day at 10 o'clock, the CEO and the second in charge sit down and do a system-wide briefing that's recorded for everyone to hear, and they address everyone's concerns. And even when the information was bad or was not good news, such as, "Hey guys, sorry, we still don't have the PPE, the personal protective equipment. We're looking for it. We're calling China. We're calling everywhere. We're doing what we can. We don't have it yet. We're going to do everything we can to protect you." But they tell us, and then a couple of days later, it was like, "Hey, that shipment that we were telling you about a couple of days, it's coming tomorrow." So, and then down to the surgery department level, at 8 o'clock, we have a Department of Surgery meeting where we go through how many residents have been impacted by the virus or quarantined, how we're adjusting the services because of this. And so I found it very helpful and very reassuring, because you feel like you really understand the fight and what the struggles even the top leadership are going through.
And Dr. Hustead, on that point, I think there might be this tendency in leaders when there's bad news to communicate. For example, PPE. We don't have the PPE that we need. There might be this tendency to not give people the clear picture of what's actually going on. What's the balance as a leader during these types of times between giving people honesty but also giving them hope?
I think transparency is important. I think, Kevin, you really touched on that you were getting a lot of transparency from your leadership, and that was helpful. And I think that's important when you do it. And Scott talked about setting that tone, and the tone is important when you're conveying those things. So if your tone it's calm, it's optimistic, but it's also, I'm going to listen to what the issue is. I'm going to create a space for us to think about what we're dealing with, and then being able to respond to it in a way that is clear and concise. And you can go ahead and share. I think you can share all the information that you have. I think there's no reason to try to kind of hold that information, hoping that it won't create fear. Because actually getting as much information out to as many people as you can helps to calm the situation, particularly as Scott was talking about, the tone of which you do it. And so I think how Kevin was sharing what the organization is doing and trying to get information out in every way you can, no matter what that information is incredibly important. In our hospital, it's evolving. We don't know how do you communicate. We have 500 plus medical staff, and we've got 3,000 plus employees. How do you get that out in a way that people hear it? And we're slowly kind of making sure and changing practices so that we can get it to as many people as possible. Part of that is also kind of rounding, to use a medical term, and a combat term for that matter, getting out and seeing where the people are and what their needs are, and then sharing that information at that level as well, and then getting their input. And we'll talk more about that. I think Scott already touched on it. The importance of getting input from every level in trying to make these decisions and move this ball forward, and how we're going to deal with the thing that we've never seen before.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that point with you, Dr. Hustead, but real quick, I just want to highlight something both of you said about communication. Dr. Kniery, with you, it sounds like every day there's this expectation that news is going to be delivered. Same with you, Dr. Hustead, of this consistency. In my organization right now, every day at about 5 p.m., I know there's going to be an email from our general officer giving us the most up-to-date information. And obviously that's changing, but at least he's created this expectation that I know every day I'm going to get clear, honest communication. And I think leaders out there right now, you can increase the pace of your communication, and it's okay to tell people, look, something has changed. This is fluid. We don't know, but I'm going to give you honest communication. Another thing, and Dr. Hustead, this might be something I could put to you. How important is it right now to give people encouragement and maybe even more recognition where you're seeing, because I think there's a tendency when there's so much negativity, so much uncertainty, so many emotions. How is it important now to maybe increase the amount of recognition that you're giving to people, or increase the amount of face time you're getting with people?
I think it's important in lots of ways to hear people, to listen well, because, and through that, you can then help them come up with solutions that they'll be empowered to know that, hey, you're listening, you're hearing them, they're giving good ideas, and then you're going to empower them to go out and take care of that. And I think in this case, it's a leadership principle that I have felt is just imperative, and it's to lead with humility, knowing that you don't have all the answers. You don't have, and a lot of the answers are going to be out there, but you have to create a culture where people are willing to share because they know you're going to hear them. You may not be able to do it all, but if you can encourage them, as you're talking about, consistently encourage, thank you for that idea. That's a good idea. We have this issue. Can you help us through that? If you can really listen and think and allow them to work through that, and then, very humbly say that it's not about my ideas. It's about what our best ideas are that we can move forward. That is an incredible encouragement to people that they're going to keep giving them. And, I work with Doug Crandall, who you had on your podcast, I don't know, about last week, I think it was. And he wrote a book, Permission to Speak Freely. And one of the things, overriding principles, is how do you create a culture where people are okay saying whatever they need to say in any tone or environment any way they need to say it. And it may not always be perfect. And it may come I've had a lot of phone calls and a lot of texts saying, hey, Tom, think about this idea, or I have this concern, or you're not doing this, and sometimes it's easy for me to think, I'm working as hard as I can here, and take it personally and as an attack, but if you can create a culture where people are willing to do that, and they have that sense of, another very key term that they use in their book is assuming positive intent, that no matter how they say it, they're saying it from the goodness of what they want to accomplish. It's not, and if you can assume that, and you can hear that, and then encourage that, as you kind of got to in the beginning of this question, is how do you encourage that? That's so important. As often as you can, thank people for what they're doing. Acknowledge the little things, because when you acknowledge those little things, hey, in the middle of that meeting, you stayed positive, you had a smile, that really made a difference. I could tell. They're going to keep doing that because you're setting that tone for those little things that are important. So I think it's probably right now, for us to truly win this fight, so to speak, we have to find innovative ways in every way we can. And that's creating a culture where people are willing to do that, and you can hear them, and you can then acknowledge it, and then give them the resources to go, act on it. Hopefully that's the difference that it makes in your organization, or maybe even across the country.
Dr. Kniery, I think you've mentioned before that your hospital right now you're seeing some innovations in the sense that people are doing jobs that maybe they wouldn't normally do. Can you tell us a little about what you're seeing with individuals doing things that aren't really in their wheelhouse in terms of medical practice?
Yeah, it's so I'm at Cornell currently, and it's a hospital that really takes care of everything. And we are basically have shut down everything other and making the entire hospital a critical care hospital. So all the pediatrics patients are moved to an outside hospital. All of the patients that are non-COVID positive are moved to the orthopedic hospital across the street. And currently we have turned in the ORs into ICUs, and every ICU, whether it was a surgical ICU or not, has been turned into a kind of a COVID critical care unit. And so what this has required is people cross training. So these nurses that have been working in the ORs, been working in clinics, they're all doing 2-week courses, and they're shadowing these ICU nurses, because currently we aren't maxing that volume out yet. So there's still time before the hospital's full of COVID patients, before these nurses will be expected to take care of them. So really the nursing staff has really been put through crisis. So have the residents and some doctors also, who are now taking critical care roles. But I've seen they're really putting a lot of tasks to the nursing force to really step up here.
Dr. Steele, are there any other combat principles that you have applied in the past, or just leadership principles that you've applied in the past that we haven't talked about yet that you think are critical during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think all this stuff goes hand in hand, whether or however you say it. I'm a colorectal surgeon, and so what I can tell you is the fact that when I was deployed in combat, I remember a medic said to me once, he said, don't, and I apologize about this, but I'll never forget, he said, don't feed me a bag of shit and tell me it's a brownie. And, people want to know don't underestimate your team. We talk about transparency. People want to most people who have been in combat, or most people who have been in critical situations, they want to know what's going on. And, by being transparent, having that communication and having honest and forthright communication is, when you tell people, listen, we got to go back out there again, they understand. But if you say, well, we may not, they know when something else is coming. And then all of a sudden, then you lose your team. We talk about in sports a lot about the coach who lost the locker room. I think one of the worst things that you can do as a leader is lose the locker room, because once you lose that trust, even if you're trying to do it in somewhat of a way of trying to kind of hold some things back, and there's no, there's no right or there's no wrong in it. To what degree does leadership keep some things within? Because let's face it, we don't always give everything out there, whether you're at whatever level of leadership that you're at. But on a team level, making sure that your team understands that and not underestimate their ability to cope and respond and understand a situation. I think that's critical. And I think that once you start to run into trust problems, it's very difficult to get those type of things back. So as a leader, you need to really understand, listen, I don't know where we're at. Tom said it before, based on the current situation that we have right now, this is what I can tell you. This may change. It may be in flux. It may change tomorrow. But this is the best information I can give you. Is different from kind of trying to smooth something over or equivocate or do something else where they're going to know if that's not the case. And then you lose that locker room, you lose that team, you lose that trust. And then it's very, very difficult to get that back.
Dr. Hustead, I think anytime really there's this tendency for leaders to want to control situations. I think especially during times of crisis, but sometimes with control means micromanaging, means you're not empowering your team. What should leaders be thinking about right now as they're probably feeling that need to control the situation? Should they still be kind of fighting that tendency and empowering their teams? Or is this a moment where you should maybe pull back and control a little bit more?
Actually, I think Scott was just nailing it as far as thinking that you're in control and holding on to information is one example, exactly what he was saying, giving that information away. I think at this point we need to give as much away as we can to let people act and work and do Jeff Webb, I mentioned before, he wrote this article. He asked me for some input to it. And that's what started me kind of reflecting on how I'm doing as a leader, even in this current crisis, and coming up with some thoughts. And Jeff had some great principles. And one of the things that he wrote in the article was commander's intent, which, you think to our military days, the commander's intent is, hey, here's kind of the problem, and here's our resources, and here's our end state, and here's how we need to get there. And then you as the leader need to go out and accomplish that. And as long as you know what the commander's intent is, you can make decisions at the lowest level that fall within those guidelines. And the way I would to say it in the medical field is, we have some really, really smart leaders. We have physicians and other clinicians at a lot of different levels who are very smart, highly trained, and trained to think critically. So if we can give them as much of the information as we've talked about as they can get, if they can give them, hey, this is where we need to get to. And one example for us has been, we want to mitigate in every way out in our outpatient and in the hospital the exposure to the COVID. How do we do that? Let's figure that out. And then here's the resources that we have to do that. and I'm going to try to provide you as much as I can. Here are the constraints that we have to do that. And then within those boundaries, make good decisions, because we have 50 some different clinics out there that all are a little bit different, have different resources, different layouts. They may not be able to do it the same way at every one, but we have smart people in each of those clinics who can work together, who can think critically, take the information they've been given, give as much of the resources as you can, and then let them make decisions and make good decisions. Empower them to do that. You will come up with some brilliant ideas. You will see people make decisions and put in place policies, protocols, operating procedures, all those things that you never would have come up with yourself. And so as I go around and look at some of these clinics, I'm amazed by some of the smart things they've done that I never would have come up with, but gave them as much of the information, as much of the resources, and a little bit of guidance of what the goal is, where we want to get to. And it's just cool to watch them do it.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up here, I'd like to go around and just get some parting words of wisdom and advice from each of you to those that are out on the front lines right now, trying to anticipate what is about to come. As we've mentioned before, we have kind of what's in front of us, and then we have the unknown that who knows how far off it is. And maybe you could speak to that as well. But I'd like to start with you, Dr. Steele. What advice, just parting words, would you offer for those out there that are trying, again, to lead in uncertain times and navigate so much uncertainty, and also sustain themselves for what could be not weeks, but we're talking probably months, I would assume. And I'd like to get your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I think you need to be flexible and be malleable. And that is not only on a personal level, but it's about all members of the team. I think that, having that ability to understand that it's almost like trauma surgery when you're trying to intervene with incomplete information, right? Or with the best information that you have available. And you got to be malleable. You got to be flexible. You got to be willing to kind of take a look back and say, God, that worked, that didn't work. And then the other aspect is that the last point that you touched on, we have to plan for the other side. And I'm not just talking about kind of what comes out of this, but I'm also talking about, we didn't get as much into, but, a lot of the people out there, they have surgical disease or something that's put on hold right now. And when all this calms down, how do we track those patients? And how do we, if you turn the lever back on, how are we planning ahead of taking care of that next level of when this all comes down, so we get those patients back in and take care of those? Because, the worst thing in the world you want to do is let anybody slip through the cracks, especially when we're talking about health. There's nothing more important to a person than health. We talk about money, we talk about all these other things, but let you get sick, let somebody die, that changes your perspective on everything. And the one thing we share is we share health. And so, we may say it's non-essential surgery right now for somebody who has X, Y, and Z. But to that individual patient, that may be the only thing that dictates their entire life, and they can't have a quality of life without it. And so while it's important that we put our focus elsewhere, when we get back to the point, how are we going to incorporate those patients back in the system? So there's no question there's different tiers of priority now, but don't forget about what are the next steps ahead.
Dr. Hustead, what kind of parting words would you offer as well? And I'm also curious to get a sense of how long do you think this is going to continue on?
Well, that's actually the hardest part of it, Cal, is we just don't know. I mean, that's the issue of, well, I think it's going to be protracted. Obviously, I don't think this is going to end in 2 weeks. Obviously, it's going to be at least months. Who knows what it'll look like even next year? Does it come back? There's so many unknowns that make this so difficult. We've talked about so many great leadership principles, and my kind of parting thought was, you mentioned we have this referent group trying to teach leadership to physicians, quite honestly, and because timely, we need physician leaders, we need medical leaders, like never before, with clinical experience. And one of the biggest things, Doug, like I mentioned, Doug has kind of put together this curriculum that he uses, and with Matt Kincaid, and then Jeff that we mentioned, and when they teach, almost always it's from a component of, you got to reflect. If you want to be a good leader, you have to take time for reflection. And certainly in the heat of it, maybe it's only a few moments of just, I don't even think before I do, let me reflect a little bit. But at times you've got to create space where you can reflect as a leader, because, if I'm being honest, went to West Point, and I was in the military as an officer, and I went to leadership schools and all these different things. And I can honestly say about 15 years into my career, I was like, and I suck as a leader. I just reflected and thought, I'm not doing this well. How am I making others succeed? And I realized that reflection is such an important part. And they just hammer that home, how important reflection is. So quite honestly, even just thinking about doing this podcast, some of the things that you sent out, Jeff's article, and that he sent me, hey, Tom, what do you think? Caused me to reflect, even if it was at 5:30 in the morning when I woke up or late at night going to bed, what are some things I've done, even in this situation, that I could have done better? What have I learned? I think back to some conversations that maybe I could have handled better. My own emotions, did I handle them well? You think of these principles, but it's hard to do in the moment. So if you're not taking time to reflect, because this is going to be a while, learn from each thing that you do, whether it's the things that you did, the actual, specific things that you implemented, or maybe it's just the way that you led. You will do yourself well to give yourself a chance to create space to think.
Yeah, I think
Dr. Hustead, I have one question on that. How do they, I think reflecting is probably a weakness of mine. What do you guys suggest and offer in sort of concrete ways of how to reflect?
Yeah, good question. So it starts from the very moment that we initiate the program, and it starts with reflecting on what makes you a leader. What are your core values that define you as a leader? Because all of us are going to be different leaders, and there's no right answer. Whoever you are is who you are, and that's a really important part of your reflection, is what are my core values, and then how do I portray those to the people that I lead, and then reflecting on how we talk about not only ourselves, but how do we lead others and communicate with others. So there's some very specific tools that we use. Probably the most powerful tool that I see as we've been doing this has been a tool called the journey line, where you create this kind of journey in your life with the highs and lows and all that fit in there. And where are those specific examples in there that defined your core values? That's a powerful thing to do. It's made a huge difference in people understanding who they are. But then when they hear other people's journey line, to understand them better, how they communicate, what makes them tick, why they act the way they act. And all of a sudden you start to have a little bit of grace for each other and a connection at a much deeper level that makes you much more effective as a leader. So, without getting into all of them, I think that's a real powerful tool in reflection and determining who you are as a leader.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And Dr. Hustead, you mentioned the Referent Group. Where's the best place for people to find information about the Referent Group and connect with you?
If you just go to our website, thereferentgroup.com, you'll have all the information there. It has my phone number. I'd be happy to talk with you. And we love what we're doing. We feel like if we can help our physicians and medical leaders be better at leaders, the whole hospital system will win. The Global Leadership Summit, if anybody's familiar with that, they always use a term every time, everybody wins when a leader gets better. And that's our intent. How do we bring up the medical system because we are improving our leaders in it?
And Dr. Steele, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, you can email me at harkersteele@mac.com, or if there's a lot of great information at the Cleveland Clinic at my.clevelandclinic.org. That is constantly going out on a daily, if not hourly basis.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an honor to sit and listen to you all. I know I've learned a lot from this exchange. I wish you all well as you navigate this moment in time at your respective medical facilities, and you lead your own hospitals, and sincerely appreciate your time here today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Cal.
Hey everyone, sincerely appreciate you watching today or listening to this podcast. I hope you learned a lot from Dr. Hustead and Dr. Steele. If you did, or if you know someone that would enjoy this or benefit from this, especially those leading during this crucial time in the healthcare space, please share it with them. You can share it via social media. You can share it via text, share it via word of mouth. I sincerely appreciate that, and I hope that it will make a difference. Also, you can subscribe to this podcast. Every 2 weeks, we release a new episode, either focused on personal growth, self-leadership, or organizational leadership principles. You can do that on Apple Podcasts or anywhere where you listen to podcasts. And then finally, remember, show notes and the full bios and contact information for Dr. Steele, Dr. Kniery, and Dr. Hustead is on my website, calwalters.me. Go make the most of this week. Go lead well. Remember, life is short, so let's make it count by living an intentional life. Take care, be well, and wash those hands.